Let's talk about the status of the three big clans at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, but spoilers beware. Alright, so the three big clans in JJK are of course the Gojo clan, the Zenin clan, and the Kamo clan. These are the movers and shakers in society, wielding both actual power but also political influence. But by the end of JJK, things had kind of been turned on their head. For starters, Maki massacred the Zenin clan, wiped them completely off the map. Then of course Gojo Satoru was killed, and as the limitless six-size user, he essentially represented the sum total of his clan's power and influence. So we've got a bit of a vacuum here. And this didn't go unnoticed, which is why we got that plot point about the new Shadow Style school positioning itself to try and take control of the Jujutsu Society, until Meme and Kusakabe told them to sit down. Long story short, the entire society had basically been shaken up, which was by design, right? Because Gojo wanted to fix things for the next generation. It's why he killed the higher-ups, it's why he cultivated these students to be the type of people that they are. So looking forward from JJK, we likely, or at least optimistically, wouldn't follow that same three big clan structure. But at the very least, we know the Gojo clan did continue on, and it's not as if they would have been like wiped off the face of the earth, but obviously the societal structure is going to retain some of its bones and structure. So who might lead these clans leading into tomorrow, even if they aren't necessarily the ones pulling the strings of society like they previously did? Well, for starters, thanks to the JJK epilogue, we know what happens with the Gojo clan, because there we get this excerpt with Yuta Okotsu's grandkids finding Panda in one of the Gojo clan storehouses, and we find out that Yuta is now a Gojo clan representative. Now, as far as the Zenin, again, they were completely wiped out except for these two. But these two do represent a lot of power and influence. So assuming either of them wanted to try and build that back up again, then they easily would have been able to. And it's not as if either of them would have just like completely abandoned the name, but it's more so as like building an empire like that, something they actually wanted to do. So does the Zenin clan still exist? I'm sure, but is it pivoted and placed to be like a powerhouse in the same way? Well, it just depends on if either of them wanted to do that. But if they did, it's one of them. And then for the Kamo clan, I know a lot of people think that Yuji might become the acting clan head since he now has the blood manipulation technique. And in fact, a couple of questions that I'm going to get to asked me about this. And obviously, we're all in headcanon territory here, right? So my opinion is no more valid than anyone else's. But personally, I don't see Yuji as acting clan head for the Kamo clan. Just because he has blood manipulation and somewhat of a familial bond with Choso, I don't really think makes enough sense for him to be like, yeah, put me in charge. Nor do I think Yuji would really want to be in charge of the Kamo clan. Honestly, I would see Noritoshi Kamo fulfilling that role, because we know he was originally being groomed to be the Kamo clan head until he was ousted, but now given the events of JJK with, again, society turned on its head, I think he might willingly step into that role again and kind of build society to this, again, optimistic, hopefully better version of itself. Perhaps even in tandem with Choso, assuming that's something he wanted to do. We do know that Choso will need to kind of find a new direction for his life now that he has more so embraced humanity. Maybe he would connect with that side of his family. And assuming that Choso has a longer lifespan than a normal human, maybe Noritoshi Kamo would even pass the torch to him once he got too old. And honestly, there might be a whole bunch of new clans. If anything, they were trying to move away from the previous structure, right? So instead of only having three people in control of everything, maybe kind of everyone starts to build a household, and at least, again, optimistically, maybe there is a far more democratic setup going on here with the Itadori clan and the Kugasaki clan and the Kinji clan, etc. In any case, though, I do think this would be a much more peaceful, harmonious society because the strongest people are all cool with each other and would most likely be in positions of influence. Now, how long that lasts is a good question, because the cycle always continues. There's always going to be people, vying for power and corruption and all that stuff, right? I mean, Mei is still out there, I'm sure, making moves in the shadows. But again, I think society on the whole is going to be a lot better compared to where it was at the beginning of JJK. All right, next, I want to give a shout out to Camille, who helped inspire this video with his comment here. And y'all can pause to read the whole thing, but he's talking about all of this, the clans and what it's going to look like in the future. But one thing I haven't already addressed is something he asks about Angel and Hannah, saying, could Hannah's bloodline now inherit Jacob's ladder as a technique? And this is an interesting question, right? Maybe. We don't exactly know how things like this work, but assuming that Hannah's body was engraved with Jacob's ladder, very similarly to how Yuji's body was engraved with Shrine, then assuming that affects her on like a DNA level, then she should be able to pass that along like any other curse technique. And assuming that Megami and her do get together, then yeah, that's a rich bloodline full of very powerful techniques that could be passed down to their clan. Same with Maki and Yuta, obviously, with the Ten Shadows and Gojo kind of coming together there. And then I want to give a big shout out to Clint as well, who also sent me in some comments related to all of this clan stuff. So y'all pause to read it if you'd like. And again, we have addressed some of these things already in the video, but one thing Clint says is, could Yuji combine his usage of Shrine and blood manipulation and pass that down to his descendants? So similar to the Hannah and Angel conversation we just had, I do think that it makes sense that since it's been engraved on his body, he would likely be able to pass that down. However, I don't think that he could like combine them and pass that down. Now, I mean, who knows, right? We don't really get an explicit breakdown of how all of these things work on like a genetic level, but I do think that Yuji could think of creative ways to interplay those two techniques, but I don't think that he would ever literally be able to use them simultaneously, because we know that you just can't use two curse techniques at the same time, as we saw with Sukuna, going back and forth juggling the Ten Shadows and Shrine technique. So could, Yuji's descendants do that? Probably not, because I doubt any of them will ever inherit both the same way Yuji has both. The only reason he has two techniques is from an extremely weird circumstance, and I don't think that aspect of things could be passed down. I think his descendants could either get blood manipulation or Shrine, but Clint does pose some of his ideas for how you might creatively combine these techniques. So the first thing he says is, with poisoning an opponent with his blood via blood manipulation, Yuji could make a binding vow to only use cleave on blood cells outside of his body. And I do think something like this would be possible, because this would just be a creative, pairing of them, not literally a simultaneous usage. So perhaps like some sort of binding vow where Yuji's blood satisfies a sure hit condition, right? Where like, for example, Yuji using his soul slashes or Sukuna using cleave, we know they have to touch to do that, right? So theoretically, maybe Yuji could satisfy that touch requirement with his blood. I think that would be really cool. And then the other suggestion he says is Yuji makes a binding vow to use furnace with piercing blood. Could be like Nezuko's blood demon art from Demon Slayer. And I think something like this could be possible, at least in the same way that Sukuna made binding vows with his furnace, wherein he's not like actually doing anything outside the realm of what's possible in Jujutsu. He's just being creative with how he applies it, if that makes sense. So yeah, I certainly think that's in the realm of possibility for Yuji, assuming his Jujutsu genius is on par to do something like that. And then Clint also said he thinks that Gojo's characterization and views of the higher-ups could be a social commentary on Japan. And I certainly think that there's elements of that there, of course. Like, a lot of JJK goes a lot deeper than the surface level, right? And there's a lot of commentary from Gege Akutami. So, for sure, right? And that was one of the main points of the entire story, right? Like, changing the society to be better for the next generation. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, thank you for watching.